What would happen if a nuclear bomb were detonated on the moon? Is it possible to use such a weapon as a tool for mining valuable materials? These are questions that people have long sought answers to. Today, you will learn about the most ambitious and frightening projects that were planned or implemented in America. And at the end of the video, you will find out what could happen to living creatures in the event of a nuclear explosion. Enjoy watching. Sometimes I feel like all these scientists, researchers, and governments are actually some kind of cultists and fanatics. Why? Well, have you ever heard of the Amazon vaccine? I recently learned about such an interesting experiment, and I want to tell you that it really shook me. Its essence was to study the human body's reaction to an epidemic disease for which they would have neither a vaccine nor immunity. Sounds wild, doesn't it? Yet such an experiment was conducted in America in the 1960s. I really don't understand the point of it, because one could simply recall the times of the Black Death or any other serious epidemic. But apparently, the Atomic Energy Commission of America needed more precise data than the millions of deceased ancestors. As a result, a special group of scientists was created. They were equipped with everything necessary and also modified the vaccine. In fact, it was not a life-saving liquid intended to combat many diseases. Inside the ampules was the real measles virus. And I am literally shocked by the cynicism of these people. The thing is, indigenous people had never encountered such a disease before, and therefore they had no immunity. So a real epidemic began in their tribe. And the scientist responsible for this whole experiment forbade employees to help the dying people in any way. In the end, they just watched the disease progress, made notes, and recorded the rate of spread, and they couldn't care less about the lives of thousands of indigenous people. Personally, I am shocked by this story, because such things happened just a few decades ago, and yet indigenous people are still oppressed. And what do you think, are such experiments normal? I hope you already understand how strange scientists can be and what experiments they are willing to conduct. But if the previous two projects seemed boring, safe, and even ordinary to you, then the next one will turn out to be one of the scariest and most terrible. The thing is, in America, there were also people who wanted to engage in terraforming the Earth. However, they planned to use not the best methods. One of the main projects was the creation of another canal that was supposed to connect two oceans. It may seem like nothing scary about it, as similar work is currently being done in Turkey, but there is one big but. American scientists wanted to do this, using 26 nuclear charges. You've probably heard what would happen if a dozen nuclear bombs were to explode on our planet. Climate change, radioactive contamination, millions of dead animals, disruption of flora and fauna. And all of this didn't really bother the scientists of the past century. Fortunately, the project was not carried out, as the authorities of Nicaragua categorically prohibited conducting such tests. But another project involving nuclear weapons was still carried out. It was about extracting valuable minerals using explosions. So in fact, the largest artificial crater in the United States was created, and the result was not the best, as many areas of the states of Iowa and Nebraska were heavily irradiated. Naturally, this led to diseases in animals and humans. So I am very glad that similar canal projects were not implemented, because all this could have led to huge catastrophes. By the way, about them, you got into a car accident in America and don't know what to do next? Where to turn for help? Where to find a competent lawyer? How to get compensation if you don't have insurance? The DTP America company helped its clients receive compensation of $21 million. Here, they will definitely answer all your questions, link in the description. Surely everyone has heard that astronauts undergo very tough training for their bodies. And I also heard that these people must have exceptional health, not have any harmful habits at all, and they never even tried alcohol. And all this is necessary just to leave our planet for a while. That's what happens when you're really fed up with everything. Just kidding. In general, during the space race between the USA and the USSR, a huge number of different tests were conducted, and one of them was related to preparing for the flight to the moon. In the conducted experiment, scientists studied the effect on the body of enormous loads that could be experienced during landing on the Earth satellite. The project was called reactive sleds. The point was that special sleds accelerated to enormous speed and then stopped quite quickly. And this was the most ordinary simulator that allowed astronauts to experience maximum overload. However, the data collected by scientists indicated that the human body is not very suitable for such loads. Monkeys were launched first, and most of them suffered serious brain damage. But scientists didn't stop there, and they launched one brave person into the hellish installation. And in these sleds, he underwent a total of 29 trials, and not once did he escape without injuries. Concussions, rib and limb fractures, loss of dental fillings and teeth, bloody eyes. I'm scared to even list all these consequences. But, as we already know, all this was not in vain. And the USA was the first to send a man to the moon and then bring him home. So you could say, all this was really necessary in the name of progress. Though, at what cost? By the way, how do you imagine modified soldiers? Personally, I recall computer games and movies, like people getting microchips implanted, weapons inside their flesh, or special eyes with zooming capabilities, or even night vision. Interestingly, similar experiments were actually conducted in America. However, they were quite peaceful. The thing is, there were no implants, surgeries, or anything of the sort. Scientists found a much more interesting way to give people real superpowers. So a genuine scientific experiment was conducted. It involved soldiers receiving as much vitamin A as possible through regular food. The point is, this microelement contains a molecule responsible for the light sensitivity of our eyes. And do you think the experiment was successful? Absolutely. Volunteers were fed food with special additives for several months, and it had a good effect. The test subjects' eyes became much more sensitive to light with long wavelengths, which means they could see better in the dark. Of course, they were still far from night vision devices, but the fact that regular nutrition could give a person superpowers really surprised me. But unfortunately, this experiment was canceled. Everything seemed to be going so well, so why close the research? The thing is, scientists invented night vision devices. So, soldiers with enhanced eyesight were simply no longer needed. By the way, how would you prove your strength and power to the whole world? For example, the American government dropped nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and they also had an ambitious project that involved exploding the moon. It's frightening to imagine what could have happened if all this had been realized. Anyway, the point was as follows. It was necessary to show and prove to the whole world that nuclear weapons are something no one can deal with. So the government wanted to detonate quite a powerful charge on the moon, and this plan was taken quite seriously by the government. In 1958, scientists gathered and considered the possibility of implementing the project as well as the consequences. The scientists decided that they needed to detonate a hydrogen bomb during a full moon so that people on Earth could definitely see the flash. However, just a year later, they completely abandoned the idea. Why? All because of the radiation, which could spoil plans for colonizing the moon, as well as the possibility of negative effects on our Earth. But there was another problem. The hydrogen bomb was too heavy, so delivering it was problematic. And using a bomb like the one that exploded in Nagasaki was pointless, as it was too weak. By the way, there would still be problems with delivery. What if something happened to the rocket, there was an accident, or something even worse? But here I am going on about nuclear explosions and their consequences. Let's talk about something else, something even more terrifying as a mass destruction weapon, biological warfare. If you don't know what it is, here's a brief description from me. Basically, biological warfare refers to weapons that work thanks to the action of living organisms. For example, scientists conducted tests of a bomb containing Siberian plague spores on one of the islands, and now it's impossible to live or even be on it for the next 100 years. That's how dangerous this type of weapon is. Actually, the American military machine was also developing something similar. In 1954, a real laboratory for creating such weapons was deployed at the Dugway Proving Ground. Scientists were tasked with finding out if insects could be used as carriers of diseases. Americans were mostly interested in whether fleas could carry the plague, the same Black Death that decimated much of Europe in its time. During tests in the desert in Utah, quite a lot of containers with infected fleas were dropped, and on the ground, there were cages with guinea pigs, which were used as test subjects. Scientists assumed that fleas might not survive the fall from such a height, but, as it turned out, the experiment was quite successful. Poor rodents were infected with fleas and consequently, plague. Scientists got the data they needed. It turned out that containers with insects needed to be opened closer to the target, as not all of them hit the intended target, but still, the experiment was successful, except for one case. During the first attempt, a container with infected fleas caught fire inside the plane, causing all crew members to be infected. It's scary to imagine what they experienced then. By the way, the whole project was called Operation Big Itch. I think I don't need to explain why. And even though it was successful, it was still shut down. While producing 50 million fleas per week was easier than pie, creating the same huge amount of plague virus was unrealistic. I hope you already understand how ruthless and horrible people can be when they have a goal. But if in the previous experiment with the plague, only test guinea pigs and fleas suffered, which generally people don't care about, Then in the next case, everything was much scarier. Have you ever heard of Operation Plumb Bob? Personally, I learned about this story only when I was preparing for this video, and I would have been better off remaining ignorant. The thing is, scientists needed to obtain data again on how a nuclear explosion affects soldiers' combat readiness. Personally, I think if I ever see something like that, I won't be able to do anything but seek shelter. But soldiers have tasks they must perform. In general, American scientists selected a target group of 167 servicemen. All these people were sent to the state of Nevada, where they spent a whole month learning various safety measures and weapon handling. And at the end of the training, they just took them and detonated a nuclear bomb nearby. Don't worry. The explosion was quite far away, so people barely suffered. The soldiers were required to watch the explosion, after which they needed to disassemble and assemble weapons, run through a minefield, and pass a test, which involved infiltrating behind enemy lines. In general, all those drills they show in army movies, running, overcoming obstacles, walls, and crawling in the mud. At the same time, scientists compared all the indicators before and after the explosion. And it should be noted that the values hardly differed. All the soldiers coped with the training. The time was more or less the same, and their psychological state turned out to be useless. Overall, this entire experiment turned out to be unsuccessful. Why? Because all the members of this group had already witnessed a nuclear explosion, and the point of the experiment was to observe the reaction of people who had never been in such a situation before. So, none of the results obtained proved to be useful. Just imagine, they had to endure 2 nuclear explosions in 1 year. It's horrifying, to say the least. Nevertheless, scientists were quite humane to people, but not to animals. Nobody intended to send soldiers to certain death, so in one of the experiments, cells with pigs were placed in close proximity to the nuclear explosion. They were covered with various materials to test which one could provide protection in case of a nuclear explosion. And it must be said, most of the animals survived the explosion. Only some suffered serious burns, but most of the animals were found to have leukemia due to high levels of radiation. So, ordinary concrete walls can save you from certain death in the first minute. Although, I think that's not the worst outcome yet. After all, more than 16,000 animals suffered from leukemia after the experiment, and no concrete walls will protect you from radiation, let alone anything else. Well, I would like to say thank you to all the test animals who, unfortunately, suffered as a result of all these experiments. Because of them, we now know how to survive a nuclear explosion, and people have also realized how dangerous and inhumane biological weapons are. In general, there were many positive results from all these experiments, but I'm still scared at how inhumane they were. Today, I told you about the most interesting projects that were implemented in America. Write in the comments which one you liked the most, and also if you want a continuation. And thank you for watching.